You know, mothers are so special that expectations are high on the second Sunday of May. I made the mistake of messing that up a few times early in my ministry. I preached one sermon on the meanest woman that ever lived on Mother's Day. I really did. I was in my early 20s, I preached on Athaliah. I thought that would be interesting. The mothers did not find that interesting. There were several complaints about that. The feeling is expressed by an outspoken church lady who said to the preacher, said, "I'm bringing my mother to church on Mother's Day, preacher, and you can talk about anything you want, but it better include mother, and it better be good." A few years ago, there was a show called Mad About You. You remember that? Paul Reiser, I think is the way you pronounce it. I'm not sure, and Helen Hunt. Now, Paul is the one I'm talking about. I saw pictures of these two when I was looking this up. They do not look anything like those two people anymore. But especially him. I didn't even recognize him. I saw the picture, so I thought if I put that picture up, you're not going to know who in the world I'm talking about. But I put this picture up because that was what they did when the show was on. But he right after the show was canceled or whatever, he wrote a book called Couplehood. I believe it's in 1994. And there's a quote in there that I just wanted to read to you. I thought it was really good. If you're a mother in here, I think you'll appreciate this. He said, "I saw a kid who had some dried up food on his face. His mother took out a tissue, spat on the tissue, and rubbed it into the kid's face." I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. This goes on in communities around our country on a daily basis. It's enough to break your heart. You know that if babies could talk, they'd be the first thing they'd bring up. "Hey, don't do that. It's revolting." Would you like it if someone did that to you? Okay then. It is disgusting, but it sure does work, doesn't it? There's something in mother's saliva that cleans like nobody's business. All women, once they give birth, their enzymes change and saliva becomes like Ajax. It'll clean anything, a baby's face, a countertop, a Buick. You get enough mothers, you can do a whole car in 30 to 40 minutes. And the best part is, it doesn't even have to be your mother. I go up to total strangers. "Miss, do you have kids?" "You do?" "Could you spit on this?" I can't get it out. I'll get it off of that. There are many surprises of motherhood. I think her hard labor is soon forgotten. They forget all about having a baby, and they're wanting to have another one before you know it. As terrible as that pain is, a mother will have another one, according to John 16:21. There's just joy over the baby being there. Another surprise is her greatest accomplishments as a mother, according to the Scriptures, are her children. 1 Timothy 2:15, it's saved through child bearing. It's not so much having the children as it is, that's the way life goes on in this world and saves the world through it. Her anxious stresses are the source of great blessing to her. The thing that often worries her the most is, who's that messing with my child? Who's going out with my child? Who's going to marry my child? And that's the same all the way back to Rebecca. But those grandchildren that are produced by that, it really doesn't matter anymore. You're just thrilled to have the grandchildren. And her biggest disappointments are her personal shortcomings. It's not her children. It's not her husband. She's more critical of herself. And so even though that's true, the sins which we all have are many. It's those many sins that make us love the Lord even more for forgiving us. So there's some really surprises about motherhood. But the treasures of this earth, the greatest treasures of this earth, are not the temporary things that we seem to focus on. It's not the possessions we have, the clothes we have. It's not things like that at all. But it's actually the treasures that you end up putting in your heart. And that's really what this little lesson's about. It's not that deep and profound, but I think it might be a blessing to you. I'm taking from the life of Mary tonight. And from Mary's life, there's basically 3 instances that indicate that there are 3 predominant things, at least in her life, that she treasured, that I think are true in all mothers' life. Number 1, a mother keeps the treasures of the stories of her children. It says in Luke 2:18, but Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. And what was those things? That is the story of the birth, and how in verse 18, and all those who heard it marveled at those things which were told them by the shepherds. It's the stories around the birth of Jesus. And whether you know it or not, mothers seem to be the story keepers. Now I know that there are some exceptions to this, and maybe the fathers are the story keepers in the household, but that's actually more rare. It is the mothers. I mean, one of the things is, at least in my household, I can't remember what happened. And it seems like my wife can remember everything that happened. And it's just everything. She remembers everything. And so she remembers all the stories. Don't you remember when we did this? And I'm like, no, I don't even remember ever going there. That's regular. That's the honest truth. I don't even remember ever going there. We went there, yes. And don't you remember what, Heath did? No, I didn't even know we had Heath then. So no, I don't remember that. So the story, she ends up becoming the picture keeper, and the pictures aren't kept the way they used to be now. Everybody has them on their device. I mean, they're keeping them that way, but they're still the picture keeper or the picture taker and the story keeper. In the stories of your life, it's going to be your mom that's going to tell the most embarrassing stories about you. And the dad, if he can remember them, he would do it. He just has a hard time remembering any stories. But the treasures of motherhood are the stories of her children. So if you really want to know the truth, and this is the truth, I tell this to everybody getting married. People getting married, they're all so persnickety about getting married. Have you noticed that? They just want it all perfect. The dress has got to be perfect. The event's got to be perfect. They're so concerned about the music and everybody saying the right thing. But the truth is, the greatest things that happen in a wedding are the blunders. Because it's the blunders, particularly by the kids. It's those blunders that that's all they talk about. I don't remember anything you said. Well, she had on white. Whoa, big deal, But it's the blunders, and particularly the little stories of children. So the treasures of motherhood are the stories of her children. The second treasure that she holds in her heart, she's like the treasure keeper, is the treasures of the honors of her children. In Luke 2 and verse 51 it says, then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject to them, but his mother kept all these things in her heart. And we were talking about this after church this morning. What would you do if you knew that you were the parent, or at least the guardian as Joseph, and the Son of God, the Messiah, was in your keeping, right? And he goes missing 3 days in Jerusalem. And you find him after 3 days, and his first comment to you is not, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, don't beat me to death. But it is, don't you know that this is where I would be? Well, I'm afraid I'd risk perdition, and I would wear his rear end out. I'm sorry. I don't care if he's the Son of God or not. I would have spanked him for that. And if any of you wouldn't, I don't know what in the world you're thinking. Son of God, Savior of the world. I'd say, well, you're getting a spanking for this one, but I'm dying for the world. Yeah, I'm about to kill you right now. Not going to happen. But it says that she kept all those things in her heart because in her mind this was an honor, because all of the great scholars were like impressed with his great knowledge, that he was not only listening to them, but he was asking and even answering questions that were surprising them. In 2:47 it says, and all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. You see, I believe a mother is not just the keeper of the stories. I believe she's the keeper of the awards. You know, they're going to make sure that they set on a shelf. If you got a certificate, she knows about it. She's got a book with your certificates in it. She's got a shelf for your medals or for your sporting events that you went through. And I believe in this case, that's exactly what this was, except this was so wonderful. The only place you could keep this honor was in her heart. And she kept it in her heart. So the treasures of motherhood are the honors of her children. So not only are the stories, but the honors. And then thirdly, a mother and keeps the treasure, and I think this is the biggest one, of the faith of her children. I think that's the greatest treasure that a Christian or a godly mother can have. It says, and this is interesting, that the Bible goes out of its way to tell this. This is Luke, which had told that story that I just mentioned, right? Well, Luke writes Acts. So it's not surprising that Luke would tell about Mary and be the last one to tell us about Mary. It's in Acts chapter 1 and verse 14. These all continued with one accord in prayer. So Jesus is ascended back to heaven. And now this little group of about 120 that are left that still hang on and still believe, that know that Jesus has risen and are planning to do something with that information. It says, then these all continued with one accord in prayer during these 40 days from the time that Jesus had ascended, and supplication with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. So Jesus had ascended, and it's been now just about 10 days since he's ascended. I made that sound wrong a minute ago, but basically it had been 40 days since he had rose from the dead. And they're all together, but it points out who is there that really matters. The mother of Jesus and his brothers. Now these brothers are the ones that didn't believe. They didn't believe he's the Son of God. I mean, who could believe your brother is the Son of God? Isn't that right, Caleb? I mean, you just couldn't believe something like that. I mean, you just wouldn't be able to believe. So basically, you just could never believe that your brother was anything special, right? So how could that be? And so that was basically their feeling while he was alive. But once they saw him rise from the dead, the whole thing changed. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, was there. Now, I don't know how old she was at this point, but the thing that just touches me is the greatest believer had seen the most. There was no doubt in her mind who this man was. In 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 7 it says, and we have this treasure, we have a treasure, in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. Each one of us have a treasure, and that is the truth of the gospel and the faith that we have in our heart. It is the greatest treasure that each of us have. We don't have a greater treasure. The fact that you believe tonight, you're wealthy. That's the greatest treasure you possess. But what I notice in this text is, and I really believe it's true, a mother is the keeper of the convictions and the commitments and the acts of faith of her children. She remembers them going to church. She remembers their faithfulness to God. She remembers that. And that's maybe the most important thing that's in her heart. And it's her treasure. So a treasure of motherhood are the faith that her children have in Christ Jesus. Because what do you want for your children? You want the best thing possible, which is eternal salvation. So a mother keeps the treasure of the stories of her children. And so all those stories, memorabilia, whether you know it or not, likely your mother has, if you had crayons when you were a kid, has a drawing somewhere. And she has the honors of her children. If you did anything, even if you're just perfect in attendance one year, it's probably in there, or made an A one time. She's probably got that somewhere. I know, my mom kept all of our records of every grade we made all the way through. And a mother keeps the treasures then of faith of her children and remembers those times. And all of those ultimately are kept in your heart. If mom, that turned? Yeah, it changed. If moms keep the true treasures, then one is only really rich if you have a good mom who keeps good treasures. Abraham Lincoln said, "All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." And then he said again later, "No man is poor who has had a godly mother." Amen to that. One of the Spanish proverbs says, "An ounce of mother is worth a ton of priests." I guess we'd translate that to preachers, right? I'm working on the ton. Napoleon said, "The future destiny of the child is always the work of the mother." And then John Quincy Adams, one of our presidents, said, "All that I am, my mother made me." There is a book called The Prophet, and no, it's not so much a religious book, but it's a pretty interesting and good book. I don't know if I can pronounce the guy's name. Gilbrand's the last name, but Khalil, I think, is the way you pronounce his first name. He's a Lebanese artist, a philosopher and writer. It's pretty interesting. It was published first in 1923. It's been translated into 40 different languages. He wrote on children, and I thought this little section was really good. And so let me just include that here. He says, "And a woman who held a baby against her bosom said, 'Speak to us of children.' And he said, 'Your children are not your children. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves the bow that is stable." Be stable, moms, so that the bow will bend. You know, the problem is that we resent the bending. We resent the pressures that cause us to bend. And we think we've got to hold those arrows tight. We've got to keep them close. But it's that bending and the pressure of that bending, and then finally holding them as tight as we can until finally we have to let them go into the world. And they go under the care of God. And you just have to let them go. And you'll always have the treasures of those stories. You'll always have their honors in your heart, and you'll always have their faith in your heart. You've done well if you're a mother that has a child, that there's great stories you want to tell others, and there's honors to tell, and there's a faith to talk about your kids. You've done well. Now, would your arrows fly as far as they can? Well, they'll fly further if you are a good bow. And that's what we're called to be. Mothers, we appreciate you more than you know. Maybe not as much as we should, but more than you know. I've never watched a football game and seen a guy on the sideline say, "Hey, Dad." Every time it's, "Hi, Mom." We may talk about our dads, especially us boys. We'll talk about our dads. We'll say, "My dad beat up your dad," but it's our moms that hold the soft place in our heart. If you're here tonight and you want to give your mom the greatest gift, then it's those great stories and those honors of your life, but nothing will be the greater gift than your faith. If you need to rededicate your life to the Lord tonight, If you need to obey the gospel tonight, let me tell you, your mom would be thrilled. She will never forget Mother's Day. That would be the day she would never, ever forget. So the God of heaven and earth, who calls us all, is calling you. If you need to come, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?